to draw a lot of things very quickly. The technology I've got in Fortresscraft is quite old, but it's quite good. The technology I used in Nomancer was better, and the technology used in Subcity was even better still. So what I'm going to be doing is looking at a few different ways of rendering a lot of things, doing some profiling, and seeing how it stands out. Now, as ever, this is not scheduled. I don't have a plan. I don't have a script. I've got a 3D printer warming up. I have a kitten laying all over my function keys. I have a cup of coffee, and I invite you to sort of come with me on this sort of journey of how can I render stuff. What I'll be doing is looking at a few sort of options of rendering stuff. This is the one that means that it's a pain in the ass in Unity. I will have to use threading. So that means I can't use Unity's built-in rendering system at all, or I will need an interface. Unity is absolutely appalling at multi-threading. It just shows an error going, don't multi-thread stuff. Space Harrier arcade sheet. Oh man, of course no one's ripped that. It surprises me, the entire concept of rip sprite sheets, because you see them and then you see people writing in letters going, do not distribute this without crediting me. It's like, dude, you just ripped off someone's sprites. You shouldn't be asking for credit at all. You should be going, don't mention my name in this piracy whatsoever. That'll do. And I'll just quickly edit a sprite out. So I'm hoping to look at rendering from sheets, you see. So sheets allow me to render more stuff with less texture switches. That one's the least horrible. Now the advantage of using texture sheets is that I don't have to worry about powers of 2. I absolutely need to revamp my instance rendering system because it is really quite old. It doesn't support things like frame culling and stuff. I want to move towards, in Fortresscraft, as much as possible, rendering stuff without game objects. There's sometimes you can go hell for leather and you can just implement new stuff. It's a house of cards. Sometimes the thing I want to implement is higher up the list than I want, and right now I need to spend quite low down. Now we've got a transparent robot. Now I've got a GPU instancer, so that's cool. We're going to want a quad. Now I don't want to use sprites. So this is a brand new project, and I've just added a folder, and it's taken 6 seconds to rename a folder. Ta-da! We have a robot. So today is not about anything pretty. You might see a lot of programmer art, and if that's your idea of beauty or pretty, then you just stay along. The reason I'm making it look like Space Harrier is one of my favourite games. What I have in mind probably look quite a lot like this. So basically I'm going to start with game objects, which will be slow. I'm sure they will be slow. And then going to start with game objects with instance rendering and see how that goes. I'm then going to move to Fortresscraft Evolve System. I'm then going to move to indirect objects and then GPU code indirect objects. It's something seriously up with Unity. Like, I've just changed the point mode on one object and it just takes 7 seconds. Hey, there we go. Hashtag ship it. Switch to cutout. I did some of this stuff in Subcity, which Subcity is on Park, but it's basically waiting on Andy, who has a lot on his plate anyway. What it most needs now is to look loads better. Basically what I want already and copy it. All I want is a basic thread wrapper. Right, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to create a threaded class that just simply try and generate objects. And then what we'll do is we'll set it up to generate 1 million objects, and we'll see how slow it goes. And then go from there. I really wish that Unity did this, that after a decade, I still have to write entirely my own thread wrapper. They've never done it. It's bizarre. Cool, there we go. See, I like that. I've just written an entire threaded do-nothing system. And what I'm trying to do is write a system to generate a lot of objects quickly. That's quicker than the one I already have. I think it's -1 for unlimited. Sorry, the default frame rate is the maximum achievable frame rate. This is Unity's documentation for you. The default target frame rate is a special value -1, which indicates the game should render at the platform's default frame rate. The default rate depends on the platform. On standalone platforms, the default frame rate is the maximum achievable frame rate. Ooh, that sounds good. Oh, hold on guys. There's an example down here. Application.target frame rate equals 300. Comment, make the game run as fast as possible. Didn't you just say I should put in -1 for that? This is one of the problems I have with Fortresscraft, of people setting the target frame rate really high and then complaining. Setting target frame rate does not guarantee the frame rate will be achieved. Well, no shit. They were complaining it's not running at 1,000 frames per second, and they couldn't see very far.
Why does my car explode when I drive it too fast for too long?
It doesn't have things like a frame rate counter built in. I have to write my own one every time. It blows my mind that this sort of really basic stuff isn't there. Unity knows the frame rate. It has to, because it's got a function built in. Are you running at the target frame rate? Right, with a bit of luck then, it should tell me how many frames per second. 158, 188, 190. Nowhere near as many as I was expecting. Now, genuinely surprised that my frame rate isn't more like 1,000. Oh, it's taking 5 milliseconds to update the editor. So if I were to run this, if I make a build, a few other bits of tech to do for Fortresscraft. I'm going to do landscape map, follow-based renderer. But this one's important because we've got a lot of stuff in Fortresscraft where I just want to render more. And we've been talking about a plan with the builder bots. Now, if I run it outside of Unity, we're getting about 1,000 frames a second, which is much more what I would expect. The moment I actually start throwing load at it, the editor will start to match up very quickly. Now I need to pass back from that thread once a tick to a system that can't work on a thread to do something on a thread. A bit more tricky. In C#, it is mind-bogglingly difficult to find out how big something is. And you think it'd be the simplest thing. How big is this class? And it goes... This is where I need to start thinking about the storage of the data. So the current Fortresscraft system is a bit of a pain to add and remove stuff, and I'd like to make that easier. Nomancer has a very simple way of adding and remove stuff, except the instance things. Concurrent queue, I should just be able to shove stuff at it. What we'll do is we'll do a try DQ, because we don't care. So if we can't get it, don't matter. This will limit us to 1 spawn per frame, which is probably not going to be enough. I seem to recall the old GPU system was fairly... It didn't mind lots of requests 1 frame. Like 1,000 requests 1 frame took about as much as 1 request 1 things. And all of this marshalling is such a pain in the ass. Now, for the moment, we're alright. We've only got 1 game object, so we can just do that. I can try some different rendering techniques and see what I get. Should be able to just spawn a thing, but this is a lot more difficult than you think. This is on a different thread. Now, Unity absolutely does not allow you to do what I'm about to do. There is no way of doing it. I hate the default ones. We've got 2 ints, a random double. So what I have to do is I have to do that, then multiply it by the range, and then subtract half the range, because I don't know why. You can't get or what I usually do is I usually generate it at 10 times the range, so I'll minus 320, come with 320, and then divide that by 10. The Fortresscraft system that was like this fell over, because it was very, very good at creating objects, placing objects, and rendering objects. It was very bad at moving them. 1 object moving was as expensive as like 1,000 objects moving. Hey, there we go. We'll camp it at 10,000. I'm going to go to 1,000,000 and just see how it goes, because you get people going, when I render 10 objects, it's 1,000 frames a second, but when I render 15, it's only, I think. You have to do a lot to measure stuff. If I'm just doing a few objects, there's simply not enough meat to measure. It's like measuring the fuel efficiency of a car by driving it 6 feet. Whoa! And right now, that looks great. Now, if you've ever done a Kickstarter, and you've gone, hey, we've got this great idea, hey, look, blah, blah, blah. And I can do a prototype like this, it's fine. But I'm not doing anything else. I'm just rendering these 10,000 objects. Now, this is 10,000 game objects. So we're rendering 1,000. The frame rate's the same, but let's make a build. So as you know, we were getting about 1,100 frames per second. So we've gone from 1,000 frames per second to 100. So this is, I'm running a lot of objects, don't get me wrong, but it's 10,000 times slower than what we were rendering. That's acceptable, that's fine. That's what I would expect. Just flipped on instance rendering. So now using instance rendering, and I've gained 30, 40 frames a second. That's not as many as I was expecting. That's interesting. But I'm going to hazard a guess, since it's going to be primarily game object overhead. The editor is apparently spending a whole bunch of time doing stuff. Camera render is now 9 milliseconds. It might be. Now, if I were Unity, I'd have quietly switched on instancing and just not told anyone, because it's always better. Instancing on and instancing off. A surprisingly small amount of difference. I suspect if the GPU was being pushed harder, which we will, we would see a greater jump. So we'll spawn 100,000. Oh, now we're getting some frame drop. But this is the kind of the numbers I want to push. This is where Unity becomes completely useless.
Drawing takes a long time.
Oh dear, let's investigate that. Well, primarily, I'm waiting for the batch renderer to flush. Brilliant. What does this possibly tell me? Nothing. Now, same thing, but with GPU instancing on. So now I'm hammering the GPU hard, but I have 100,000 game objects. So we're running at 20 frames a second. No particular difference in there. We're spending 32 milliseconds rendering. Very much is going to come out of that. I probably also need to despawn more than we are. Oh. So it is going to hurt during spawn, and I need to think about, are we spawning 1 million? That seems like too many. That's like, Unity will not support 1 million game objects. It just won't. If I make the camera go a bit faster, you can see the frame rate's really not very good though. So I can tell now, as the frame rate's going up, it's rendering that's causing the issue. It's very, very hard to actually properly profile Unity any further because Unity is as dumb as all shit, as we are probably all aware by this point. I would like to know whether or not this is the cull, whether or not this is the fill rate, you know, what is the fundamental issue, what could I address? If it's fill rate bound, I could probably address this primarily by having a better, cheaper shader. Now the good thing about that all being on a thread is I can easily put complicated logic there. I like this system to be modular and robust enough to also deal with the mobs and foul cores and stuff like that. And because this rendering system is a lot faster. It can't be Unity, it's the bottleneck. Unity being the bottleneck just means CPU. I doubt my GPU is at 100% utilization. You can't use your GPU to 100% utilization because there's no such thing. Your GPU is made up of compute units, it's made up of tensor units, it's made up of fill rate units and transform units. It's a bit more complicated than just going usage. My goal is, well, it was 1 million, but 100,000 might be a bad goal. My goal is basically that, but about 10 times faster. So I have a reasonably good framework that I might try and improve. Fortresscraft's GPU instance rendering with a full indirect renderer. Now, an indirect renderer means that right now, every single frame, I take 100,000 objects separately and shove them up to the GPU separately. About as inefficient as it could possibly be. Horrific. Unlit. Surprising. So I don't think it's my GPU that's the limit here. So I've just gone from an expensive shader to a cheap shader. Make no difference to the frame rate. It's still 10. So I will take the Subcity renderer, the improvement on Fortresscraft renderer. I want to bring this across, then immediately update it to the latest GPU instancer. See what I can't squeeze out of it. Windows Task Manager doesn't... It's a bit like asking if you are utilising your car. If you accelerate your car 100%, are you utilising it fully? Are you only utilising it fully if you're accelerating 100% and the trunk is full and there are 3 passengers in it? Is that utilising a car fully? It's just a non-statement. Oh, is it saying no, not because it's the same? Okay, there's almost nothing has changed. Apart from that, so there is a change. So let me commit that so I can then diff it afterwards. This is what I mean about wishing I had a faster computer, faster internet. I'm just literally wasting my time. For those of you who do have access to Fortresscraft 2, let me know if my recent changes are good or bad. I did some quite big ones. I don't have time to sit there and actually play the game properly at this point. We've now got the whole GPU instance. Now I didn't write this. I've just written some integration code. Now this is the point where it steps outside of my realms of knowledge. So Fortresscraft used a GPU instance that I did write. If I was in a situation, somebody else was doing it, would implement the old system, measure that one, and then move on to the new one, and so on. But I don't have time, and I'm 99.9% sure this one is better. It's very easy to run the GPU flat out. The way to run the GPU flat out is not to run the CPU very hard. It's very easy to run the CPU very hard. Don't run the GPU. It's very difficult to utilize them both. In the main menu on Nomancer, nothing's happening. So I'm not running any simulations. I'm just drawing the scene as quickly as I can. Now, this is where it annoys me that they've gone a bit far. So we've got a billboard. Yay. So now if I were to attach the robot... yeah, it just means I forgot to cap the frame rate. Doesn't matter. Why would I have a billboard that has a shiny? I think my frame rate counter doesn't work below 10, you know. Usually what you do is you count frames, and then you see how many it took to do 60, and there's your frame rate. Right, so now we have a frame rate that is still 10, with little surprising. 10 is a very odd number to just sort of stick at. Maximum allowed time step. Let's go down as low as 2 frames per second. That's a more accurate frame. So basically at a certain point Unity just goes, this is stupid, we're not doing this. It's a particularly useless shader because it's a billboard shader that's lit. Spectacular combination of dumb. Billboard shader always faces towards the camera to give the effect of a three-dimensional object when it's not three-dimensional. But it also rotates. That makes no sense. As it pretends to be a 3D object, but it's not, it will look different. What other shader do we have? We have vertex lit, which is no good because it's not cut off. With 2D renderer soft occlusion, which looks very complicated and therefore I don't want it. Standard, which is probably what we'll be going with. Because it is casting a shadow, which is important. And it could be any shape. So just bear in mind, I'm not actually trying to render sprites. I'm just rendering cheap 3D objects. And that is the cheapest quad. I'm happy with the current system. Let's just call that robot prefab. And then we'll have a different way of doing it. And we'll call this robot instance. What has to happen is for every object in the game, using the current system, I need the Unity way of dealing with it and the GPU way of dealing with that. What I need here is a GPU instance renderer. This is my way of managing what prefabs there are. The GPU system itself, it's quite good at doing only one thing, and that one thing is drawing prefabs. It doesn't manage the drawing of the prefabs. I need to do that myself. So the instance definition says that let's just set up the types for, this is the one thing that does need to be per game. So in this case, we'll just do the robots. So what I'm planning to do is I'm planning to expand this 1,000 different types or whatever and just shove loads of things in it. The important thing is for Fortresscraft, it must be easy to add more. Game objects are nothing. This game object is just, there is a robot. We can have 1,000 robots. The chunk of data that stores what's happening with robots. How many robots there are, where the robots are. Now quietly go onto a thread. When you have a lot of threads, nearly all of which are asleep. And just wake up the right thread, does a little bit, and it goes back to sleep. Rather than one big monolithic thread, checking to see if there's lots of work to be done. This is where it became a pain. So GPU instancer, I had to have, they had to be prefabs, because I don't know why. I love that. It's like, oh, but you've only got one of them. I'm like, yeah, but I will have more soon. There's a bit of a naming thing. So we've got the GPU instance prefab manager and the GPU instance manager. One of them is mine, one of them is not. We allocate for all of the types, and that's all well and good, but I'd like to do it directly from the ones we actually locate. Let's get it working, and then we'll tidy it up, because obviously if I tidy it, it might not work at all. Well, it crashes, so... Error, missing prefab. Forgot to assign prefab. Again, I'd like to stop having to do all these assignments, so we're going to try and idiot-proof this a bit. Every time you slightly rewrite something for a new project, it gets slightly better. But let's find out. I think that might work. I think that might now spawn 100,000 objects via full indirect instancing. We have a limit of 10,000 robots right now. I don't know what the limit is. Let's just crank that up to 100,000. Oh, maybe I'm doing 1 million. No, I was doing 100,000. I don't know how many you're doing. So we're now at 160 frames a second, rendering 100,000. Now, don't get me wrong, we have issues. For example, the shadows are borked. Pretty good. You can see what I mean about implementing text. We've just went from more or less, but not quite as good as what Fortresscraft had, to much, 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 much better. Now I can go super smoothly. I'm not culling these. I'm not adding them. I've just rendered them all. So I've just generated a field of these. There's no clever, there's no smart, there's none of that sort of thing. Just throwing it all at the GPU going, psst, do what you want. This pleases me. Now what I've done is probably not very efficient, because what I've just done is I've just had a single bucket of 200,000. Go and fill that. Whereas you should be doing multiple buckets. A bucket is you put stuff in it. It's kind of that simple. There are massive spikes because I am adding way more than I would ever add in one frame. We're running 140 frames in editor. Let's see how, no, look outside the editor. 400 frames a second with 100,000 and no smartness. Let's see if I can avoid having to create an instance prefab and a GPU prefab and assign them in a list. Everything I've written, barring the spawning of the robot, should go straight into Fortresscraft. So once I've tidied this up, the next step is I'm going to start updating the robots. I'll make them jump or something. I have a horrible feeling that is going to be way, way too slow. What we've got here works great for stuff that spawns once and never does anything again. I don't think I can update a lot because I think I'm shoving too much data across from thread to Unity to GPU. unless there is a way of doing this entirely threaded / GPU side. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to make them bounce. I might need to break the link here. So what happens here is I've sort of hopped from thread A to thread B because I had to go via the Unity system. But I should be able to simply go straight to that one now. Because it's still at lots of frames per second. So I need to fix the shadows. Now starts to come the bit that's slow. So we've shown that drawing a shit ton of objects is easy. We've shown that spawning a shit ton of objects is easy. The hard part, moving or updating them. Because we're going to spawn different things. Right now we have a very odd situation of 200,000 of the same thing. Most of the stuff in Fortresscraft doesn't move, so this is perfect. What we've got here is perfect vegetation. No problems. It's no good for if I want 200,000 foul cores. So the Fortresscraft instant render is pretty good. It had a few issues, all of which I addressed in this iteration already. Sit side by side with the old renderer, and then I can move stuff across. Plant renderer in Fortresscraft might just stay. There might be no reason to push it into the system. If I've done everything right, and the chances of that are pretty small, then the next thing that happen is this robot should all go straight up. That's what I'm expecting. A little bit of bounce code, and then we've got every object moving every frame. I did not increment the spawn, so we were probably moving one of them. We're moving quite slowly. It might just be that I'm actually trying to run as a thread at 60 frames a second, and it's not capable of doing it. That should actually tell me how long the thread's taking. We've got 16 milliseconds to spawn and move 200,000 objects. Fortresscraft works in a very, very different way to allow me to get away with a lot of objects. It is something stupid, like starting the stopwatch after I finish doing all the work. Right, yeah, so it's taking 400 milliseconds. That does not surprise me. I'm still rendering at a gazillion frames per second. We are spending 2 milliseconds per frame, and that's not a bad number, updating the visibility buffer. I'm doing a fairly stupid approach right now, and I'm updating them all at once, every single one, every frame. I would assume, or at least hope, that those scale better. I don't have any faith at all that the GPU system is multi-threaded, so little is. This will now actually spawn the objects linearly, rather than spawning most of them millions of miles away that we couldn't even see them anyway. Thankfully, Fortresscraft has all this done already, so I don't need to reinvent the wheel there. I'm trying to keep this as much as I can, just to bolt on to Fortresscraft. Now I can generate things, spawn them slower, and not have such a massive impact. That should hopefully make them bounce with gravity now. I'll actually randomise the bounce just a bit. Realistically, what I need to do is not try and update 200,000 things in one go. If I was to approach this as a project I was actually going to ship, I would start splitting down into their own threads and worker classes. The bush system spawns the bushes. We're still running at 90 frames a second, but what we're not doing is updating them. This is a bit of a teaching stream. The camera is over there. If I move here, this guy is still jumping up and down. There's no reason that guy to jump up and down. That guy is 10 kilometers or something. This is on purpose. I'm hitting it with brute force to give myself the worst case scenario. I would need some sort of culling system saying, look, just don't update this. Just don't bother. There's no point. I'll just store the camera position. Is I base that on the frame rate. The frame rate's 100, we do 100 meters. If frame rate's 10, we do 10 meters. This is something I try and do in almost every game I write, is have a whole bunch of dynamic frame rate stuff. And it's weird. Games just don't seem to do this. Like, hey, your game's running at 5 frames a second, but here's some more particles. Whereas I try very hard not to. That's complete and total shit. It's not 100, it's 1 divided, it's 1,000 divided by. I was trying to run the game at 6,000 frames per second, and it was going, I can't do that. Those of you who are following Fortresscraft 2/Patreon chat, you will see the potential plans mooted for the builder bots. I've got the CPU time, don't have the GPU time to do it. So I am making the GPU time to do it. So this is a non-game, cross-platform, cross-everything system to do that. The time set should either be 1 or 1, so we don't need to. What I kind of assume with the threading is that you hit thread cap, but you actually manage to run within the simulated time. If you overrun, stuff just starts to run slowly. Fortresscraft copes up to about 500% overrun. So I started with a system that ran at about 2 frames a second. I then got a system that ran at 1,000 frames a second. And now I'm trying to get a system that can simulate at 1,000 frames a second. And that's why it takes so long. It's waiting for like 8 seconds. It's not simulating. It's just gone to sleep for too long. What happens is the thread system, it simulates, measures how long it took to simulate, sees how much time it's got left, and then just sleeps that much time, freeing up CPU resources for other things. Target time is 16, which is because we're running 1 per frame. Cool. Last update time in milliseconds was 6. Oh, wait, hold on. Target time step is already milliseconds. That's why. Right, hopefully now I haven't put the wrong number in. Is that right? Yeah, we're getting lots of ticks. Stuff's not moving, but that's only because I've chosen arbitrary or stupid or 0 numbers. Ah, that's probably just the... I chose an arbitrary distance. Hey! I mean, numbers are wrong, but I was expecting them to be wrong. Now that's better, isn't it? Now all I've done is I have only simulated them close to camera. Now what does this tell me? But mostly what I'm interested in is, and I don't update everything. Ah, so the GPU instance manager is smart. Good. So it only updates the group. Now, if I update one here and one at the other end, I suspect at that point it can't. So I think the performance here is related to the breadth of dirty objects. It's probably the safest way of doing it. That's so smooth as well. I could probably do about 3 times as many. That's surprising how few I can update at that sort of rate. That's good to know that if I don't update very many, or at least if I update them quite close together, I would never do this in Fortresscraft. I don't just go, start game, spawn everything. A small amount of time, as per here, doing some culling massively outweighs any clever processing I can do. I don't have any current reason to draw 200,000 objects, much as I might like to. But if I were to get rid of all the objects that are too far away, get all the objects that are behind me, all of that sort of stuff, I could probably do an awful lot more. So there's a limit to how many I can have up close. So Unity has a kind of a hard limit of about 16 kilometers. So let's see how quickly I can traverse Unity's limits. So we're now moving at, Alexa, what's 250 meters per second in miles per hour?
559 miles per hour.
16 kilometers plus minus is 16 is roughly, so we're halfway. How far I expect a Fortresscraft player to ever move. They can move further. I ain't going to stop them. And that's moving at a kilometer per second. And no problems. Can't really tell. The guys in distance aren't moving them down. Let's make them jump up and down. Not everything, but now a ridiculous amount will jump up and down. The frame rate should stay the same, but the updates of the objects will slow down. That looks like a low frame rate, but it's not. That's the profiler. There we go. Profiler on, profiler off. It's updating them as far as I'm generating them, probably. I'm really pleased with the performance of this. Use culling for shadows, yes. Alright, so we're culling at 500. Let's not, just for the sake of argument. That's a kilometer. You can see the bit where I stop simulating. Sometimes I try and have fun, by the way. I do. Anybody want a Space Harrier clone? I wish there was a market for a Space Harrier clone. Possibly an interpolation thread that does nothing but take where the objects were and then push them into where the objects are. Obviously in Fortresscraft we had to do other things like run a game. If you remember Starforge, they were like, wow, look how much this is so powerful, we can do loads of stuff. And then when it actually came to it, they could run their tech demo or run their game. And that's very important to note. This is a tech demo, this isn't a game. I'm not having to worry about all the things a game has to worry about. See how the performance changes if I add a number of other objects. I've only got one draw call. The entire wood is done in one go. It's also possible that rendering more types of objects but less of each object actually gives us a much more granular rendering approach. Critical factors about Fortresscraft, and one of the reasons I love working on it, it is a mature code base. Stop snickering, please. I am able to add stuff quickly. If I wanted to add something to Subcity, it's a pain in the ass because it's a much younger code base. Hasn't got all the helper functions, whereas Fortresscraft Felix, it is a genuine pleasure to work on that code base. We're going to try and add a new thing in. I'll add a thing that doesn't move to try and see what happens, of how it will cope with multiple different types of material. How quickly it takes me to add in a new object. Instead of updating the game object, I update the position. Wouldn't update the position of the renderer unless the player's nearby, the camera's nearby. You just don't bother. You keep a track of the position, but you don't actually bother telling the renderer to render somewhere else. A problem I found a lot in Fortresscraft, people have often found stuff in weird places, and they're like, you should turn it off. It's like, it takes me more cycles to turn it off than just to render it in the wrong place. With instance rendering, it's almost impossible to not render something. If object 20,000 is deleted, you don't render objects 1 to 19,999 and then carry again object 20,000. You just render them all, but the one you don't want to render, you just render it somewhere off in the distance. You're like a million miles away. If you didn't know any of that meant, don't worry about it. We don't have access to superscalar sprites. I'll just nick something else. The Space Harrier sprites just make me happy in my special place. I don't understand how people get away with this. Someone's just selling a poster of all the sprites from Space Harrier. That's not legal. Just miss racing games like that. I have been considering spriting stuff for performance in Fortresscraft. Like, stuff that's a long way away, there's almost no reason to render them as objects. If I was actually writing this as a game, I would have no real idea how I would genuinely sort out collision. We're talking about a huge amount of collision, not just a bit, like insane amounts. If you ever look at Space Harrier, maybe 16 collidable objects, maybe 32. A lot of these games did less with more. It's a tree. Yay! Hey, I got the frame rate up. That's quite cool. Unity ECS is a shit system slammed into the wrong type of engine for people who don't know what they're doing, by people who don't know what they're doing, because Intel thought it was a good idea. All ECTS is a ridiculous and fancy way of saying cache coherency. So what you want for performance, let's say you've got a lot of objects. You want in memory, you want position object 1, position object 2. So when you read 1, the cache brings it in. Unity has transforms. The transform is like this big. So you pull in 1 and you don't quite get the second one. So all ECTS does is it makes the user, me, jump through enormous complicated hoops rather than the correct solution, which is Unity, quietly reorganizing how transform works under the hood. I'm assuming the compiler is probably doing some clever stuff here because I have no transforms. I have no rotations. All I have is next to each other in RAM. That's important. I have spawn ID, the pos, the vel, the type. They should be in the order that you access them in. For maximum cache coherency-ness. I spent 3 days trying to do my due diligence on ECTS. I couldn't. If I cannot understand it quite quickly, it's either too complicated or badly documented or bad. One of those things. I spent how long did I spend? I spent 4 days trying to implement using ECTS system, just to learn ECTS. I'm going to try the same thing using an image effect in about 45 minutes. Like, why would I ever use ECTS? Like, I can't show what it offers. It's half-assed in the extreme. I suspect Intel paid them a bunch of money. They've hit the terms of the contract and then gone, dumb. As they do with a lot of stuff. I tend to write high-performance games with crap UI. Let's put it that way. Packet Storm, Fortresscraft, they are games that shift around a lot of things and complex things. And ECTS should, in theory, give me the ability to do stuff like this, but 10 times or 100 times. But in practice, it's not. But the idea of ECTS is you could do something like rendering a whole city. If you currently have access to Fortresscraft 2, which a number of you do, I am very much looking for feedback on the new progression system. Is it possible to do it? This is what I do for a living. I have done nothing but Unity for God knows how many years. I have done nothing but high performance games. I've done nothing but learn new stuff my entire professional career. And I look at this new stuff from Unity going, what? I should not have to rewrite my code in dots with burst compilation in ECTS stacks, it should just work. It should take my code, look at it and go, you know what? Yeah. So ECTS is only any good for doing all the same work on a bunch of stuff. ECTS wouldn't work on this because we have robots that jump around and then we have trees which don't. The robots would be a different ECTS processing stack. How we wrote Burnout 3 was writing it in a way that's friendly for the cache. And as a programmer, at the time, that was my responsibility. It bloody well shouldn't be in a managed language. It's not my duty to make sure the data is correctly marshaled for performance. That's a compiler's job. To get the performance out of the PS2, we would sit there and look through the compiled code and then work out, we would change the C to make it more optimal. Or very rarely, we would override it with our own assembly. There has been some talk about the room building in Fortresscraft 2. I don't want the player to go clickety-click, here's a room, clickety-click, here's a room. It has to feel epic. It has to be in some way time-consuming. It has to be in some way resource-consuming. It has to be. Those are pillars. And people keep suggesting me stuff that basically just says, I don't want to have to do this. Do it for me. Make it so it doesn't cost resources. Make it so it's instant. There has to be challenges. There has to be things that are crap. It cannot just be an endless cycle of, oh, brilliant, you've clicked, oh, look at that, you clicked on the dialogue box. Fortresscraft cannot be that. Fortresscraft has to be a game that evolves. It has to be a game that starts off with you going, oh dear God, do I have to place these blocks? And after a while going, I'm glad I have a machine so I don't have to place the blocks anymore. If you started off with a machine doing the work for you, you wouldn't appreciate that machine's work. If you started with work for excavators, you wouldn't appreciate Super Dig. If you started with Super Dig and Sensible Power, you wouldn't appreciate normal building, and so on and so on and so on. I want to consider supporting auto building of rooms using the previously set up minion system. This should mean that when you start, you look at the minion system going, why the fuck would I use this? This is so slow. And when you've got 100 build minions, you go, why would I ever build it by hand? So I'm putting the tedium in front of the player and then taking it away again. Did Packetstorm ever get a review? If I search for adapter, it's amazing. Rating, 8 out of 10. Let's click through to the game. Rating, 100%. The player is probably going to have invested more time into doing it than they would have if they had just super built, but they will feel like the machines are doing the work for them, and that's almost as important as machines actually doing the work for you. It has to feel... The fact the minions had to route find back to the base inherently meant you couldn't enclose your base. So I still get people going, why can't I enclose my base and have the mobs attack? CPW, if you're watching this back, yeah, I'm talking about you. You can't block mobs from getting to your base. That's not a valid tactic. And one of the ways to do that is to ensure the player has friendly mobs that need to get to the base. Because if you do that, then they have to get to the base. The player is encouraged to allow the friendly mobs to get to the base in some way. The idea was that the minions could have access to a pool of resources. They would also need to go back to CPH for their orders from storage, because they would require paste. And you can queue up a building which takes far more paste than you currently have. You to carry around all the paste, you can actually have it in storage. It will look cool, and that is important. I want more moving things in Fortresscraft Phoenix. Fortresscraft also suffers quite badly from a lack of spike. Power usage is pretty much constant. Resource usage is pretty much constant. So there's not really much motivation to build batteries or storage. You just kind of just use it as and when. And they all fly and they start building it. And then I would need a way of rendering this many things in a better way than I do now. So they'd go away, they'd pick up a block, they'd fly over, they'd drop off the block, and then they'd fly back to base. And if there's another block to build, they would do that, and so on and so on and so on. It may even be that your base comes with one, and super build gets removed entirely. Super build is ridiculous. It's always been ridiculous. And they could also delete stuff too. But actually route finding just means that sometimes the last block could never be placed because they've put some stuff in the way first. Because people are complaining again, you can't make a fortress. I'm like, I know you can't make a fortress, but quite importantly, how would you? You can't just have it so the player can surround their base with 20 metres of rock and not build building any turrets. And people complain that it's boring and the only way to win is to build loads of walls. And you know that's what they would do. We had someone doing everything he could to not build turrets. Because people will quite happily play it in a bonkers way. That isn't going to be something that is an enjoyable way of playing it. You haven't worked out some clever exploit. All you're doing is playing it wrong. And you will, at some point, well, either you'll realise this and you've wasted loads of time, or you won't realise this and you'll be like, oh god, this game is so boring and tedious. Oh my god. Oh. It's usually the second one. People don't go, this is stupid. They go, oh, this is crap, sadly. Rooms, yes. Walls, no. Also reasons not to just build one big room. I had some thoughts on some ground-based minions. I've got the models. They look great. It would require the player to essentially build walkways and ramps and to quite literally make sure their base was sensibly laid out. It also means the route finding is inherently taken care of by the player. Here's a mountain, and you build a room in the mountain. The minions would start to burrow stuff out. They burrow that stuff out just fine, and then they'd start to build. But they can build in any order whatsoever. But if they build this bit first, then they won't be able to build this. Waypoints don't help. They would have to go through the wall in order to do anything. This has the weird situation of both requiring DX11 and, my god, will it run fast. That I will be implementing this system as opposed to the current one. So Fortresscraft does already have a full non-game object supporting rendering system. It's important to make sure that when I screw up, my code goes, Adam, you've screwed up. I haven't altered the GPU code at all. If they update their system, I can just update it. I'm interacting without messing around with it. It's ironic to think that what I've slapped out here took 20 people 18 months to achieve back in 84. Let me guess. This is going to work but not support cutout. What a surprise. It's so weird. It's doing everything apart from actually being transparent. Like it is, and it's also not. Unless it's got to be on this line here, but I wouldn't have thought so. I'm taking it. What the? Fine. That doesn't make any sense, but hooray, I fixed it. We've got shadow casting pass. We've got a colorization pass. Great performance. I'm really quite happy with this. That's fast as well. So I made a build, which I think Unity executes scripts whatever order it feels like, and your code should be independent. Ah, there we go. But it wasn't independent because I'm a fail. So making the build caused the order of the scripts to alter. Thread was starting up a frame before it was allowed to. It should just drop into future projects. So I will begin to retrofit this into other things. I need to focus more on screenshots and trailers. We need more Patreons. And to achieve more Patreons literally involves more pretty. Every week I spend making Fortresscraft 2 look pretty is a week less worth of implementation of gameplay. Sure you like pretty? Satisfactory did not get purchased on the strength of its gameplay. In fact, Satisfactory got bought, same as Factorio, on its trailer. Consider implementing this system into Fortresscraft on Tuesday and just giving it a hammering. Just really spawn a Christmas tree on every single block in the world. Just see what happens. Thank you very much for supporting me. Thank you very much for watching me. Thank you for keeping company.